Thinking back, I'd say it all really began during that long drive to my dad's place with Jenna. You know those kinds of road trips, just hours stuck in a car, nothing to do but get lost in your own thoughts. And somehow, those thoughts always seem to land right where you don't want them to. For me, that meant my marriage with Jenna. We had rushed into things, no doubt about it. Just a couple of clueless kids tying the knot too soon. I was 23, and she had barely turned 22. Neither of us really understood what being married actually meant. But this trip wasn't about us. It was about visiting my dad, Richard. At 45, he had decided to get married again. My mom had passed away years ago after a long, painful battle with cancer, and now here he was, ready to start over with Sylvia, a woman nearly 50, for years older than him. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. After everything he had been through with Mom, I figured he'd want to enjoy some peace. But no, he was jumping right back in, like he hadn't learned a thing from his first marriage. And then there was Sylvia. She had a daughter, Diana, who was 26 and married to some guy named Lucas. There was something about Lucas, an air of mystery, like nobody really knew much about him. As I stared out the car window, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to Jenna. We'd only been married for a little over a year, and yet, something felt off. We bickered over the smallest things, like if I left a dish in the sink, she'd get on my case, and suddenly, we were in another pointless fight. It was starting to sink in that maybe we had rushed into this. At some point, I turned to her and asked, "Do you think we made a mistake? Did we move too fast?" She gave me this look, the kind that said she didn't want to answer. But she didn't dodge it. Instead, she said, "Elliot, we're fine. Marriage isn't supposed to be easy, but we're in this together, aren't we?" Sure, if that's what she wanted to believe. But to me, it didn't feel fine at all. By the time we pulled up to my dad's place, I couldn't shake the unease sitting heavy in my chest. His house was nice, too nice, even. Dad came out to greet us, all smiles, probably trying to convince himself this new marriage was the best decision of his life. Sylvia was right behind him, her smile just as fixed. And Diana? She barely acknowledged us. She looked detached, uninterested, like she couldn't care less about the whole happy family act. And honestly, I felt the same way. Who were we kidding, pretending this whole setup wasn't completely forced? Dinner was just as painful as I expected. The conversation was forced, and everyone carefully avoided the obvious. Dad was marrying a woman we barely knew, and we were all just playing along like it was some grand love story. Diana barely said a word, while Lucas was glued to his phone, clearly checked out. Jenna put on the act of the supportive wife, but I could see through it. She was just as distant as she had been for months. Later that night, when we finally made it to our room, I realized staying over might have been a terrible idea. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the last few months, our constant fights, the cold way she acted, how she was always on her phone. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But no matter how hard I tried, that gnawing suspicion wouldn't go away. At some point, I turned to her in the darkness and asked, "Are we really okay?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared up at the ceiling, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Then, finally, turned her back to me and muttered, "We're fine, Elliot. Just go to sleep." Fine. If that's what she wanted to pretend, I wasn't going to argue. Morning came. I stepped outside for some air. That's when I noticed Diana sitting alone on the porch, staring into her coffee like it held all the answers. She looked just as lost as I felt. I sat down next to her, and before long, we started talking. It wasn't hard to steer the conversation toward our parents and their whirlwind decision to get married. The whole thing felt rushed, like they hadn't really thought it through. I sighed, shaking my head. It's all happening too fast. I mean, I'm happy for Dad, but this just doesn't feel right. Diana nodded, her expression mirroring my own frustration. Exactly. My mom never even considered dating after my dad died. And then, out of nowhere, boom, she's getting married again. It just doesn't sit right with me. Something about talking to her felt easy. Maybe it was because she understood the confusion. Or maybe I just needed to talk to someone who wasn't Jenna. Before I knew it, I was opening up, spilling out all the things I'd been keeping bottled up. The rushed marriage, how fast things had soured, how Jenna felt like a different person. Diana listened quietly, nodding. "I get that," she murmured, almost like she was talking to herself. "Lucas and I don't even know what's going on with us anymore." There was something in her voice that made me pause. It wasn't just sadness. There was hesitation, like she was scared to put her thoughts into words. She sighed. He's different. Distant. It's like he's not even the same person anymore. And then, just like that, she started telling me about him. About how he'd been coming home late, how he smelled of perfume that wasn't hers, how he'd gotten weirdly secretive about his phone. The classic signs. She thought he was cheating. And the worst part? Hearing her say it only made my own suspicions about Jenna feel more real. The rest of the day dragged on, but my mind was stuck on that conversation. It felt like Diana had opened a door in my head I had been trying so hard to keep shut. And then it happened. I had been wandering through the backyard, lost in thought. That's when I saw them, Jenna and Lucas. They were standing too close, whispering, like there was something just between the two of them. And then, before I could even process what was happening, they kissed. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to believe what I had just seen. A flood of emotions crashed over me all at once: shock, rage, betrayal. A part of me wanted to storm over and demand an explanation, to make them see the damage they were doing. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Whether it was disbelief or the sheer weight of what I'd just seen, I wasn't ready to face it. So instead, I backed away quietly, my thoughts racing in circles, too tangled to make sense of. How was this even happening? What was Jenna doing with Lucas? My mind kept looping through the same questions, searching for answers that wouldn't come. The woman I had vowed to spend my life with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, had just kissed another man. And not just any man, Diana's husband. It felt like my world had suddenly fractured, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. I stumbled back into the house, barely aware of my surroundings. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to notice something was wrong. I wasn't ready for that. So I put on a mask, a forced smile, and pretended everything was fine, even though inside, I was unraveling. I needed to talk to someone, but who? Dad was too caught up in his own life with Sylvia. That left Diana. She was the only person who might understand, the only one who could help me make sense of what I just witnessed. Dinner that night was supposed to go on as usual, or at least as normal as it could be when you've just seen your wife kiss another man. With everyone distracted, moving around the house and getting ready for dinner, I saw my chance. Diana was in the kitchen, moving dishes on the counter without any real purpose, like she just needed something to do with her hands. I took a steadying breath, stepped closer, and finally spoke. I saw them. Her entire body stiffened, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Then, slowly, she faced me, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" she asked, but the way she said it told me she already had a terrible feeling about what I was about to say. "Jenna and Lucas," I whispered. "I saw them outside. They kissed." For a long moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then, finally, she let out this dry, bitter laugh, one that held no humor, just a sharp edge of pain. "I knew it," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I knew it." I didn't say anything. What could I say? We were both trapped in the same cruel reality, and there was no easy way out. She turned back toward the sink, staring blankly out the window. "I knew something wasn't right," she murmured, her voice distant. "Lucas has been different for months. Late nights, always on his phone, one excuse after another. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was just being paranoid." She let out a slow, shaky breath. "But now I know." Finally, she looked at me again, and for the first time, I saw something beyond pain in her eyes: gratitude. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "Even if it hurts, it's better than feeling like I'm losing my mind." We leaned against the counter together, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable but heavy with understanding. It was a strange, bitter bond, but at least it was something. For the first time since I'd seen them, I didn't feel completely alone in this mess. Diana sighed and looked down, her voice quieter, almost like she was confessing something to herself. "The truth is, it's never felt right with Lucas. Even before we got married, I had doubts. I just kept pushing them away, thinking maybe love would come with time." She let out a humorless chuckle. "But it didn't. And now all I feel is anger. At him. At myself. I stayed, even when I knew something was wrong. And for what?" I nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. "Yeah. It's been the same with Jenna. The fights, the distance. I keep wondering if we made a mistake, if we were too young, too naive." There was something oddly comforting in knowing we were both trapped in the same storm. The betrayal, the hurt, the feeling of being stuck in something we never signed up for, it was different but the same. And at least, for this moment, we weren't alone in it. I don't know how long we stood there, venting out our frustrations, unpacking all the anger and regret we'd been bottling up for so long. The kitchen, though only steps away from the rest of the house, felt like its own little world, a place where we didn't have to pretend, where we didn't have to hide our disappointment. Diana turned to me, her gaze steady, unreadable. Then she spoke, and her words knocked the air from my lungs. If they can do it, why can't we? For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. Or maybe I had, and I just didn't want to believe it. But then she took a step closer, her voice softer but sharper, like a blade wrapped in silk. Elliot, why should we just sit here and take it while they get away with this? She asked, her tone laced with something almost defiant. If Jenna and Lucas can betray us like this, why shouldn't we get something out of it too? I froze. This was not what I had expected. But the worst part? I understood exactly where she was coming from. The temptation was there, gnawing at me. The desire to feel something, anything other than the pain and humiliation of being cheated on. To forget, just for a moment. To get even. We're both hurting, she whispered, her voice pleading. This could be our way out. Or at least, a way to even the score. I should have turned her down. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Maybe it was the anger. Maybe it was the betrayal. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted Jenna to feel even a fraction of the pain she had just put me through. Whatever it was that made me do it, I didn't resist when Diana closed the distance between us. And before I even realized what was happening, we were kissing. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was desperate, fueled by frustration, by pain, by something neither of us could quite name. It was raw, hungry, and nothing like the kisses I had shared with Jenna. Hands roamed, and clothes were pulled away, almost frantic. This wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was an escape. A release. And neither of us cared what happened next. As things escalated, a realization hit me. This wasn't just about revenge against Jenna and Lucas. This was about control, about reclaiming something in a situation where everything had spiraled beyond our grasp. It was reckless and messy, but it was a way of pushing back, of refusing to just be victims in this tangled web of betrayal. We stumbled into the guest room, barely managing to shut the door behind us, lost in the moment, caught in a storm of emotions we couldn't contain. But just as things were about to go even further, the door flew open with a force that sent it slamming into the wall. Standing in the doorway, her eyes burning with fury and disbelief, was Jenna. The shock on her face twisted into rage, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Are you kidding me, Elliot?" she shouted, her voice shaking. "You're cheating on me?" With her. I barely had a second to react before she was in front of me, her anger hitting like a hurricane. The sheer irony of it all hit me like a slap. Here was the woman I had caught in a secret kiss with Lucas, calling me a cheater. "You're calling me a cheater?" I snapped, my own fury rising to meet hers. "I saw you, Jenna. I saw you with Lucas. You want to talk about betrayal? Fine, let's talk about it." Her face paled for a split second before she blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected me to turn this back on her. But she recovered quickly, her stance shifting as she squared her shoulders, her expression hardening, not guilty, just angry. "I wasn't cheating," she started, but I cut her off before she could twist the story. "Don't even try," I said, stepping closer. "You think I didn't see you two in the backyard? Don't stand there and act like you're innocent, Jenna. I saw everything." For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Like she might try to spin some excuse and make me doubt my own eyes. But instead, she crossed her arms over her chest. "You don't get it," she spat, her voice sharp with frustration. "You're always so wrapped up in yourself, Elliot. You never see me. I've been alone for months. I've tried talking to you, but you're always too busy, too distracted. What was I supposed to do?" My blood was boiling. She was actually trying to make it sound like my fault. "Are you serious?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You think feeling lonely justifies sneaking around with Lucas? Maybe instead of running off to him, you could have tried talking to me like a damn adult." "I did try," she yelled, her face flushing red. "But you never listened. You were always lost in your own head, acting like I didn't exist. You didn't even notice how miserable I was." "Miserable?" I scoffed. "Maybe if you weren't busy having secret meetings with another man, things could have been different. But no, you chose to betray me." My whole body was trembling with fury, and Jenna stood just as defiant, her eyes locked on mine. Neither of us willing to back down. Then, out of nowhere, Diana, who had been silent through most of this, stepped in, her voice laced with venom. "Oh, spare us the excuses, Jenna," she said. "You think that just because you felt lonely, that makes it okay? Well, guess what? You're not the only one who's been ignored. Lucas has been lying to me too." Her eyes burned with fury, not just at Jenna, but at everything. At Lucas, at the lies, at the mess they had both created. Before I could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. And then, of course, Lucas appeared, his face shifting from confusion to shock as he took in the scene. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice unsteady. His eyes darted between Jenna, Diana, and me, trying to piece it together. Diana didn't give him the chance. "Oh, don't even play dumb," she snapped, spinning toward him. "You know exactly what's going on." "I know, Lucas. Elliot saw you and Jenna." "I know. And now everyone else does too." Lucas's face turned ghostly pale. "Diana, No," she cut him off. "I am done listening to your pathetic excuses. You and Jenna thought you could sneak around behind our backs and we wouldn't notice? Really? How stupid do you think we are?" The room erupted. Diana and Lucas were shouting over each other, accusations flying back and forth. Lucas tried to deny it at first, but Diana wasn't buying a single word. She knew the truth, and so did I. The lies had unraveled, and there was no fixing it now. "You just don't understand, Diana," Lucas barked, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Our marriage hasn't been working for a long time. This isn't just on me." "Oh, please," Diana shot back, her tone dripping with contempt. "You gave up a long time ago, Lucas. You checked out first." Their argument spiraled into chaos, their words sharp, cutting, leaving nothing unspoken. I exhaled. Then, in a voice quieter than I expected, I said, "I'm finished, Jenna." Her eyes snapped to mine. "What?" "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice firm. "I don't trust you, and I don't want to be with someone who can look me in the eye and lie." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe I was actually saying the words. Then, anger flickered back into her expression. "So that's it?" she snapped. "You're just going to walk away? After everything?" I shook my head. "No, Jenna. You walked away the moment you decided to sneak around with Lucas." Before she could respond, a new noise filled the space, more footsteps. I turned toward the doorway just as my dad, Richard, and Sylvia stepped in, their faces tense and eyes wide, drawn by the shouting. They stopped short, taking in the wreckage of the moment, the anger, the tension, the shattered pieces of what used to be. And just like that, the entire house felt like it was about to collapse under the weight of everything that had just been exposed. "What the hell is going on here?" Richard's voice rang through the room, his gaze darting between me, Jenna, Diana, and Lucas, who were still locked in a vicious battle of accusations. I watched as realization sank in, hitting him. His face fell, his usual firm presence shaken as he took in the wreckage of our relationships. Sylvia stood beside him, looking completely stunned, like she'd just walked into a scene she never could have imagined. "Everyone needs to calm down," Richard said, stepping between us, trying to regain some control. But it was pointless. The damage had already been done. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, running a hand through his graying hair, but we were far past the point of saving face. Jenna and I were beyond repair, Diana and Lucas were crumbling, and even Richard and Sylvia, who had seemed so solid, now looked like they weren't sure where they stood anymore. The shouting continued, a storm of anger and hurt swirling around the room, until, eventually, there was nothing left to say. The dust settled, leaving behind nothing but broken pieces, trust that couldn't be pieced back together, and people too wounded to pretend there was any way back to the way things had once been. I turned to Jenna, searching for something: anger, regret, maybe even the love we once had. But all I found was emptiness. Maybe that was the hardest part, realizing that whatever we'd been holding on to had already been gone for a long time. And now, there was nothing left to fight for. I took a slow breath. The fury had burned out, leaving only clarity in its place. "We need to end this, Jenna," I said, my voice quiet but sure. She didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. It was obvious she had seen this coming just as much as I had. We had both known, for a long time, that this would be our ending. We just hadn't wanted to face it. When she finally met my eyes, there was no more anger, just quiet resignation. "I know," she whispered, her voice hollow. "I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it." I nodded. There was nothing left to say. We had spent so much time convincing ourselves that we could fix what was broken when, in reality, we had never even laid a strong foundation to begin with. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "It's over, Jenna." She didn't fight it. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable, though the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. "Okay," she murmured. "I'll go stay with my sister. I'll start packing my things tonight." And just like that, it was over. No grand explosion. No last-minute desperate plea to fix things. Just two people finally accepting what had been inevitable from the start. As I watched her walk away, a strange mix of relief and numbness settled over me. It didn't feel like freedom, but it didn't feel like devastation either. Diana stood nearby, taking in everything. When Jenna disappeared from sight, she let out a shaky breath. I could see it, the same realization hitting her. We had both been dragged through this mess, and now we were left trying to figure out where to go from here. I can't stay with Lucas anymore, she murmured. I should have left a long time ago. This affair? It was just a symptom. Our marriage was broken long before this. I looked at her, seeing my own thoughts reflected back. It wasn't just about the cheating. It was about everything that had led to it. The distance, the resentment, the way we had both been holding on to something we had already lost. I get it, I said softly. It's never just one thing. Sometimes, when it's over, it's over. She nodded, exhaling slowly, as if finally allowing herself to let go. Yeah, I think deep down, I knew we were never really happy. I stayed because it was easier than admitting the truth. But after this, I can't lie to myself anymore. I don't love him. I don't even know if I ever really did. Hearing her say it was like hearing my own unspoken thoughts. We had all been clinging to something comfortable, convincing ourselves that things might somehow get better. But sometimes, there is nothing left to salvage. Sometimes, the only choice left is to walk away. I'm leaving him, Diana said, more certain this time. I don't know where I'll go, but I know I can't stay in this. Before I could respond, Richard and Sylvia stepped back into the room, their faces etched with worry. So, what have you decided? Richard asked, his voice tight with concern, scanning our exhausted faces. I didn't even know where to begin. How do you explain that everything had unraveled right in front of us? That what we had thought was stable had been an illusion all along? Richard was perceptive, though. I could see the weight of understanding sinking into him as he looked at the scene before him. It's all falling apart, I muttered. Jenna and I are done. Diana is leaving Lucas. I don't even know how to make sense of it anymore. Richard's expression darkened, and I caught the way Sylvia blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. Maybe they had thought their marriage would be the glue that held everyone together. Maybe they had hoped that love could somehow fix what was already cracking. But instead, it had only brought all the fractures to the surface. Richard turned to Sylvia, his eyes filled with something heavy: doubt, sadness, uncertainty. Are we doing the right thing? He asked quietly, his voice wavering. Maybe we rushed this too. Sylvia's lips trembled, but she took a steadying breath. I don't know, Richard, she admitted, her voice small. I thought we were happy, but now, seeing all this unfold, maybe we didn't think it through. Maybe we should have waited. I watched them, realizing that even they weren't sure where they stood anymore. Their love had seemed solid, but now, in the midst of everything collapsing around them, doubt had crept in, seeping through the cracks. Richard reached for Sylvia's hand, gripping it tightly as if it was the only thing keeping him grounded. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. I love you, he said. But maybe we need to step back for a bit. I don't want us to end up like them, Richard said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. Sylvia met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Maybe you're right, she murmured. Maybe we both need time to figure out what we really want, apart from all of this. There was no explosive argument between them, no dramatic final words. Instead, there was just a heavy, lingering sadness, the kind that settles in the quiet spaces between sentences. But I could see it in both of them. They were breaking, too. Just like Jenna and me. Just like Diana and Lucas. It wasn't a matter of if they'd fall apart. It was just a matter of when. By the time that night came to an end, everything had changed. Jenna was gone. Diana had packed her things, preparing to leave Lucas for good. And my dad and Sylvia? They hadn't called it quits outright, but their relationship was dangling by a thread. What was supposed to be a simple weekend meant to bring us all together had unraveled into a slow, painful collapse, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. And yet, amid all the destruction, I felt something unexpected: relief. No more pretending. No more lies. Just the unfiltered, undeniable truth. That night, as I lay alone in the guest room, I realized this was it. The end of everything I had known for the past few years. And as terrifying as that was, there was a strange calmness to it, too. Because sometimes, endings aren't just endings. Sometimes, they're the only way to begin again. A few months have passed since that night. Looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago, like a distant memory from another version of me. It's funny how time works when you're picking up the pieces of your life. Jenna was gone. Our marriage, our plans, our life together, it was all over. Not long after she left, I found a small apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. At first, the silence was unbearable. Those early nights, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how it had all fallen apart. The quiet wasn't just quiet. It was an echo of everything I had lost. But as time passed, something inside me began to shift. The loneliness that had once felt suffocating started to feel like freedom. I was no longer tied to something that made me feel small. No longer walking on eggshells. No longer adjusting myself to fit into a version of love that was never meant to last. For the first time in years, I felt light. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Jenna moved to another city. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. There was no us anymore, and I had made peace with that. And for the first time in a long time, I started focusing on myself. I had always wanted to learn the guitar, so I signed up for lessons. I wasn't any good yet, but that didn't matter. Sitting on my balcony in the evenings, strumming away, felt like I was taking something back. Something that was just mine. I also took up running and even signed up for a marathon. At first, I could barely make it a few miles without wanting to collapse, but I kept going. And with every step, with every mile, I shed another piece of the old me. The one who had stayed in a relationship that had drained him. The one who had been too afraid of being alone to walk away sooner. Running became more than just exercise. It became a way to move forward. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Diana. She had finally left Lucas. I wasn't surprised. After everything, it was clear their marriage was never going to last. She asked if I wanted to catch up over coffee, and I agreed. I was curious to see how she was doing, how she had been rebuilding her life after the storm we had both endured. When we met, I could tell she had changed. We both had. We sat for hours, talking about everything. The fights, the breakups, the chaos our lives had become. But this time, there was no bitterness in our words, just quiet acceptance. I don't regret any of it, Diana admitted, staring into her coffee. It was horrible, yeah? But I needed it. I needed to see just how far off course I had gotten. Leaving Lucas was the best decision I've ever made. I'm back in school now, starting fresh, and it feels right. I nodded, understanding completely. Yeah, as hard as it was, it needed to happen. I'm finally taking care of myself for a change. And it feels good. We shared a smile. Not one filled with pain or sadness, but one of genuine understanding. There had been a time when I thought maybe, just maybe, Diana and I could have been something more. Two people, betrayed by the ones they trusted most, finding comfort in each other. We stayed in touch after that, but it never turned into anything more than friendship. And for the first time, I was completely fine with that. For once, I didn't need anyone. I was finally okay on my own. As for Richard and Sylvia, they didn't make it either. Not long after my divorce, they decided to go their separate ways. I think watching everything around them collapse made them take a hard look at their relationship and realize it wasn't as strong as they had convinced themselves it was. I still talk to my dad, but things feel different now. We're both trying to figure out our own paths, both learning how to stand on our own. He's living alone now, too. And I think, in his own way, he's finding peace in that. At least, I hope he is. Now, as I sit on my apartment balcony, guitar in hand, watching the sun sink beneath the skyline, I realize just how far I've come. I'm not the same person I was back then. I'm stronger now, more certain of who I am, more at peace with what's behind me. Jenna is gone. Diana has moved on. Even my dad is figuring out his own way forward. And here I am, standing on my own. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of it.